Patty, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, Miriam, so happy to be here. I love it.
Yes, I'm very excited, especially since I saw you live recording at the NDB festival and I was
Yeah.
just amazed. Um,
Well, I was amazed by the festival. So that was a dual amazement for both of us.
I'm glad. Wonderful. And I always start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I actually call myself a live illustrator. I don't know why. I am and started as a facilitator. Um, uh, but I started so long ago because I was a drama therapist and I worked, even before that, as an actor, I worked in the jails. And there I talked about myself and introduced myself as a facilitator um, of these drama workshops. And so that, I think probably when I was in my early 20s, when I was just doing that through an arts grant.
Wow.
Yeah.
You opened so many boxes that now I want to have a look into each of them. So,
Okay.
actor drama therapist. What does that mean and how did it inform your facilitation work?
Well, I was an actor and by I as an actor in the US, you're not supported by anything but grants funding.
Mm.
So I would try to do workshops in the schools in various states, and I ended up doing both schools, and then I was known for the jails, working with young men and young girls in the jails to help them tell their story. And that was, and so then I went on to have a successful acting career. I got in a show just by chance that went to Broadway. And when I was there, I did a little of my own work because I was more of a performance artist. And when I went back to the West Coast, and I did a show in New York that got very rave reviews in a national magazine, and it was really a big deal. And then I did that same show on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon, and I got this horrific review that was like, the cover of the art section: can't sing, can't dance, can't act, can't write, don't bother. And so I performed for, 4 weekends to like house size of 7 people. And at the end of that, I was just broken. I was a broken actor. I didn't know
Yeah.
what I was going to do. So what I decided to do was um, I stopped performing. And I remember when had been on Broadway, I had watched the main character every night critique the show for as long as it ran, change things every single time. And and it was like it was never good enough. And that's what I thought about myself. It was never good enough. And the reflection was in the review. And I had this wake up call. And I thought, if I am so concerned about what somebody else says about what I'm doing, then this is not the career for me,
Mm.
because that's what that career is about. So I quit and I started gardening. I actually did a geographic. I moved to the Bay Area and I started gardening because that's all I knew how to do if I wasn't an actor. And there, uh, a friend of the somebody that I was living with, he said to me, there's a program called the Drama Therapy Program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I think you should go. I think you would really like doing that work. You were an artist in residence in these schools. Why don't you go see it? And when I went to the informational interview, the woman told my story exactly about a review that had crushed her. She wasn't going to perform anymore. And I was like, that's it. So I got a degree in drama therapy.
Wow. And thank you for sharing that. And I think what a great insight to realize, okay, if this is the nature of the work and I'm suffering, then it's not for me. I think this takes a lot of self-awareness and courage.
Yeah, it was not easy to leave that career. I went back later on. Been performing, again. But then I was paying very close attention to how would I serve the world? And that wasn't clearly the way I was supposed to serve.
Mm.
And, a lot of people might have just pushed through that and then continued to perform. But I thought, if I'm obsessed with what other people think, this is not right. I need to know myself and love myself enough that what anybody says doesn't matter. And I knew that I didn't. So I felt like that drama therapy program, it healed me.
I was about to
And
ask that.
yeah, it healed me. And and actually, when you're in a program like that, you can either write a thesis or you can do a performance at the end. And I decided to do both, of course. So I wrote a thesis, but I had a performance in which people played those characters, giving the bad review and me responding to it and where it all came from. And it was such a great experience for me to get the healing from that.
Mm.
And then, I didn't really, that changed me, because I didn't ever want to be a therapist. That to me, uh, I loved what I was doing as a facilitator, but I didn't want to be married to either a hospital setting or a older adult setting, senior center. I wanted to be able to go out in the world and use those skills in the corporate setting. And so my friend Michael pulled me into a company and he said, they're doing team building. I think you should run this. Why don't you do it? And so I did it one day and they were like, you can have that whole department. And so, you know, that's how I really, really got my chops as a facilitator. And I think I was in my mid 30s where I really began to call myself a true facilitator.
It's fascinating. And what is drama therapy? So, how can we imagine
Oh, yeah, that's a
what you
good
initially
question.
did and how you then used these skills or frameworks to apply in the corporate world?
Well, drama therapy is the intentional use of drama for therapeutic gain. So, all the improv games that you might play in a corporate setting, ways that you would warm people up or brainstorm, all of those are drama techniques in a way, right? And so, but drama therapy is the intentional use of them. So, for example, let's say we're running a room full of people. Maybe we have 100 people in that room and we want to warm them up. What I know to be true is that by having people speak individually, that scares people. So
Mhm.
that's not a way to warm up a room. A way to warm up a room is get everybody interacting with people and, find everybody in the room who has the same color shoes on you do, or the eye color, or born in the same month you are. So then we are moving and we're active, and then we go from the large group work to smaller groups to individual work, right? So then by the time we've done those three things in a session or in a day, by the end of the day, I'm willing to share in a circle
Mm.
just what I felt or experienced in the day. I don't feel intimidated because I know you and you and you, and we all spent time together. I'm not, trust is high. So
Yeah.
that was a great learning, I think.
Mm. And I love that because I think we'd learn the same things if we go through a facilitation training.
Yes, exactly.
Because this
You
is
would.
what warms up people and how we,
Yeah,
no, I would phrase it differently. That's what creates the safe space for individuals.
that's right. And the only difference with drama therapy is that you are more about the personal work.
Mm.
So if we were doing like a workshop on emotional intelligence, or we were really looking at leadership at a deep level, we would be doing therapy in a way,
Mm.
right? We'd
But
create
then,
a container.
yeah, and then therapy is for the personal growth on an individual level, and a facilitated workshop is more for the team growth or
Yeah.
for to achieve an outcome that is outside of the personal.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes I would work, or in the beginning days, I would facilitate family business meetings as a drama therapist, because family businesses are very
Yes.
contentious. They have a lot of dynamics.
A lot
And
of
so
drama.
they need a they need a drama therapist.
And I can imagine that also on a psychological level, it might be less daunting to hire a drama therapist than a family business consultant or
Yeah.
or someone who is how do you call that? A mediator.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's how. And then in that same place, when I was in my early 30s, mid 30s, I think, then in that setting, that same friend of mine, Michael, he brought in an illustrator, and it was when I saw the guy Gordon Rudeau go to the board and draw a picture of the meeting we were having, I thought, I'm going to learn how to do that. I had never drawn before, but I thought I am going to learn to do that, because he was having fun. It was visually engaging. The room was aligned immediately, and it was a lasting memory. Like, I wanted that piece of art in my house, right? So I did. I found somebody. There were, like only 7 or 10 illustrators in the world at that time doing it in business, all over the world. Like 10. There was just a handful of people. Nancy Margulies, David Sibbett, and then people, in Europe, there were a couple of people that were doing it there, some guy in New Zealand, so, or maybe Australia. And those were the people that were starting to train other people. And there was a woman, Janet Schatzman, who I got an internship with,
Mm.
and she really showed me how to do it. She helped me so much, and I was only with her for like maybe 6 months, 8 months, and I moved to Colorado from San Francisco, and I met a graphic recorder there, Janine Underhill, who has Idea 360 now. And she and I started this company together. We didn't really even know each other, but we were like, well, let's do this in Denver. So we did.
Amazing. And what I hear is this go get it attitude that
Yeah.
you have. Something gets on your mind, and then whatever it takes, you go and get it. And that's also how you reached out to me because of the festival and whether you could support with graphic recording or illustration. Um, and I find this fascinating. I would be curious where does this come from?
I I'm not sure. I think everything comes from the fact that I wanted to be an actor. When I figured out who I was, I realized I wanted to be an actor, but I could never, in my era, I didn't have blonde hair. I wasn't well endowed. I didn't have that look, typical look, that you needed then in order to get into any kind of shows. And I wasn't a trained actor. I was an improv. I mean, I could just, make stuff up. So I tried the traditional route, and nothing happened. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So I think I'll just write my own material and figure that out. And that was sort of the family I grew up in. My mother was that way. Like, she grew up in a family with a single mom and 3 girls. her father had died when she was 7 in a hunting accident. He
Mm.
went to get his duck out of the lake, and it capsized in the middle of winter in Minnesota. So my mom and her mom, they were very, you need something done, go do it. Make it happen. And my mother, she was an artist. She would never call herself that, but she really was. The house needed to be redone, she did it. She needed curtains, she made them. Furniture needed to be reupholstered, she did it. Flower arrangement, big party, she was all over it. So I think that was part of it. She was a
Mm.
good role model for me.
Yeah. And now I can see, since you came from improv, so really making things up in the moment and then writing your own material, these are then the skills that you need
Yes.
in order to be a really good illustrator. And before we go on, I would be curious about the difference between an illustrator and a graphic recorder,
Yeah.
just to make sure that there's no
Yeah.
misunderstanding.
Yeah. Well, a graphic recorder, I called myself a strategic illustrator because I was interested in the strategy of it. So I would build an image that had a metaphor or whatever. For what I was doing for you and for the festival, that I think that was more graphic recording, right?
Mhm.
I was just listening and capturing, and then I would like pastel it, make it look like a beautiful piece of art. I just wanted it to look good, right? And I think this is the difference for me was what Janet taught me is that if you want a picture to last, it should communicate the strategy and figure out what the strategy is, and then um, build the metaphor of whatever they're talking about and use that metaphor to build the images into it. So even now, when I'm in a room and I know they're using language like, well, this idea is going to explode. We want this in social media to explode. Well, I'm going to make that look like an explosion in some way so that it truly represents what they want.
Mm. And so there is listening going on very different levels. And I loved how you said, "Oh, I was just listening," because there's more than just listening.
Yeah, you're listening and synthesizing, but
Translating.
yes, you're translating, I think, and synthesizing.
Mm.
I'm not I think I'm probably less of a synthesizer than some people are really good at just capturing one image, one word. But for some reason, because I was trained in a way, I just felt like people needed to see their words up there, whatever they
Mm.
were. And I could synthesize just a little bit, but I'd rather there were enough words that someone reading it could be like, oh, that's a concept. That's what they were talking about, right? Instead of just looking at the image and interpreting it.
Mm. Yeah. And then what I think, and I would be curious about your perspective, especially when it comes to the strategic level, that we all have our own interpretation of images, and the illustration helps to create a common language, a
Yeah.
common image that we can then talk about.
Yes. I have a question about that for you, though. Have you ever been in a session where someone's illustrating and you think, it doesn't look like that? Do you know what I mean? Like that they
Mm.
haven't captured an image that you think is the correct one or the
Yes,
right one for it.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes, the artist's interpretation is sometimes a misstep, right?
Mhm.
Because you're seeing it through a certain lens, and you are too, right? So we have multiple perspectives, and this is where not being attached to whatever you've drawn is vital. Like I bring big pieces of cover up tape that would just cover a whole thing. If I have not drawn the right thing or written the right title or word, because sometimes I don't hear what they say, and I write what I think I hear, right? And somebody will come and correct it. And that to me means that they own the picture, and that's a good sign.
Yeah. And that it creates this dialogue.
Yeah.
Because very often, I would say, people don't hire you for the weekly meeting. They hire you for something that is supposed to last, to be visible, to be
Yeah.
strategic.
Yeah.
So your piece then is supposed to trigger conversation.
Yes, yes. Although when I worked at the Gates Foundation, I was really the meeting note taker for
Mm.
them, for this one facilities group. And it was like amazing that I drew every week in the meeting of this one group meeting, and those were the meeting notes they used. And so I got very creative. I drew on black paper. I brought in all different kinds of things just to shake even that up in them.
And that is amazing because I can imagine these were the only meeting notes on weekly
That's
meeting
right.
notes on Earth that were read, air quotes, on a weekly basis by more people than were sitting in the meeting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it was actually after the festival, I was reflecting with my partner about looking at the graphic recording of some of the sessions and the role of AI. And then very quickly we came to the conclusion that graphic recording is one of the few things that cannot be replaced by AI.
So true.
Because AI is very literal on everything that has been said will then be represented. But
Yeah,
this listening at a deeper level of what hasn't been said, or how the tone of voice has changed, or
yeah,
even what is relevant and what is irrelevant,
yeah.
won't
Agreed.
be, yeah,
That's
possible.
right. Well, and I think, I have, of course, experimented with AI and giving it the proper prompt to see what will it draw us. Because sometimes I'm asked to draw for a meeting. Yes, I was working at Amazon, and it was an AI session. And
Mm,
I wanted to see what would AI create with these concepts that I knew I was going to have to interpret, so that I could use it as a prompt for me for an idea of what I could draw.
hmm.
That was helpful, but it never drew. Everybody looked like just so polished, and everything was, and even when you give it prompts for things to change subtly, never happens. It
Yeah.
doesn't look the same, and maybe one day it will, but AI is not built to listen deeply. It doesn't
Mm,
care. It's a mechanism.
mm, yeah.
So, do you use AI in your work as a facilitator?
As a facilitator, not, hmm, I do actually. So, for instance, if I want to create case studies for groups to discuss, then I would AI create the case study and make it shorter and adapt it to different contexts and to different industries. And it's so easy. It would
Yeah,
cost me 2 hours and it's done in 10 minutes with a few, um,
prompts.
yeah, with a few prompts and examples. AI comes up with amazing examples that are culturally relevant, that are adjustable to different contexts. So all
Yeah,
these kind of things I use AI for. I would never ask AI to design a workshop.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have actually asked it to design a workshop, and I found that it was only a good prompt. It
Yeah,
wasn't it wasn't deep enough to really, even though gave it a lot of information, it just took the high level
yeah.
and use that. But I found that if I needed, I wanted to play a game where everybody, you draw as many parks in the world that you can't, write
Hmm.
out how many parks can you do in 20 seconds. Like it had come up with these great lists that I
Yes.
could use for the game. But other than that, I haven't found and if I want to have it to start a blog post, it might
Yeah.
be able to do that or finesse my blog post and make it written better, but it still doesn't have nuance and it doesn't have the style. It doesn't really have a sense of humor that is how we might use, I have
Yeah.
found. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's quite generic. And then it's actually interesting because either what I realized is when I give a lot of information, then it sticks to this information and remains very superficial, as you mentioned. And then it's pretty useless.
Yeah.
If I give very little information, then it comes up with out of the box thinking like, huh, I would have never thought of that. That's actually interesting. And then I can build on it. And then for blog posts or emails, what I would usually do is that I just write out my thought. I write the thing without thinking too much of every sentence and every comma.
Yeah.
And then I put it in, like polish it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that
Yeah,
works well.
it's a good time saver, I think,
Yeah.
for tasks like that. I have used it as a creative partner. I've used it to come up with ideas for images. None of the images look good, but the ideas were
Yes.
sometimes helpful,
Yeah.
just as a springboard, though. So I don't know that it will replace that. I'm curious to see where do you see that is the value that it brings?
You mean AI in general, beyond
Mhm,
the time saver?
mhm.
I think the time saver is, for me, the most valuable thing. And yeah, thinking buddy.
Yeah,
So I would put in ideas or emails, concepts, and then ask, what do you think is missing?
yeah.
What questions didn't I answer? And it's amazing what comes up.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
really.
So then I can not only save my own time, I can also save
Yeah.
time for my friends
Yes,
or
exactly.
peers.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. It's a good tool. It is. I'll be
Um,
excited to see what happens. I'm not freaked out by it. I like to see how things change because everything's changed
yeah.
so much, and COVID changed everything. Like yesterday I was thinking, wow, the world is so different now. It just is. Everybody's different. It feels like, people are much more introspective. They're much more um, think about their time better,
Mm,
you know, like
yeah,
they value their time in a new way.
that's true. And at the same time, I have the impression that we lost many of the good habits that we had established during the pandemic, the peaks of the pandemic,
Yeah,
of slowing down
yeah.
and taking more time for ourselves. I have the impression that now people seem busier than before.
Really, huh? That's interesting. Are you busier than before?
I try to make the conscious decision not to be. And
Yeah.
I didn't switch to on-site meetings.
Oh,
So I stick to online. I have maybe once in a while I do something on site, but 99% of my work is online. And this
wow, that's
avoids me.
fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, then, do you have children?
No.
No, so you don't, that's all that free time for you then.
Yeah.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, I have still, because I'm a speaker, I go and this
Mm.
week I'll go and speak to the Florida libraries, and I drew their future 10 years ago. So this same group of public librarians from the state of Oregon is gathering together, and they're going to do a new vision of the future for them, which is interesting because in Florida, 2,734 books have been banned. So I want to
And,
see how how are you doing with all of that book banning business?
and I'm I assume that they still have the visualization of the work you did
Do,
with
and I
them.
looked at it. I looked at it, I printed it out, and I was like, wow, I'm a much better illustrator now, 10 years later, but the concept is still the same. I still believe that if you look at where you are and where you want to be and you close the gap with some action steps, you can make change more quickly. And that
Yeah.
to me is the most fascinating thing.
And for me, just thinking of j- if I imagine the situation, there are all these people coming together to envision their future. And then they have the old vision
Yeah.
illustrated
Yes.
that they can really explore with curiosity. I wonder how many would have read the meeting minutes or the vision document.
I don't know, but this is so easy for them. I think they're going to
Yeah.
put it on a slide. People can look at it. We can talk about it. And then when I'm up there, that will be such great reference point to see how far have we really come
Yeah.
and where did we where do we need to make an impact now, right?
And I wonder,
Because
yes,
the, the culture is an interesting piece of it too, We live in a new era, and right now in the US is so kind of like this. So
polarized.
I want to make sure they walk out feeling valued and inspired.
Mm. And I think, yeah, seeing your ideas, your words represented in a visual in real time is definitely one way of helping everyone feel heard and
Yeah.
included. And I would
Yes.
be curious about your observations. You mentioned that you're picking up on their language and the metaphors they use and then visualizing them, basically amplifying. What is it about a company's or a institution's culture that you can pick up by the words and metaphors that they use?
For me, when we're talking about culture, it's about the people. So then it's how they're interacting in the visual. So everything becomes about the engagement that they're having. Are they supporting people? Is that part of the culture? Is are they in a disorganized environment? So one time I was drawing for a school, actually a university program on leadership, and there was a person came in to lead the session and didn't lead at all, and that was the point of it. And so the room became very chaotic, and that showed up in the visual. And afterwards, I remember somebody coming up and saying, you know that picture looks so chaotic. And I go, it's what happened in the room. I'm not, I'm not here to make a pretty picture. I'm here to do a direct representation of what we see and feel.
Mm,
And you have to be committed to that, right?
mm.
You
And
have
how,
to,
yeah,
yeah,
how does it then play out? Because I can imagine that very quickly you can become the scapegoat. In this case, if I understand correctly, it was
exactly.
intentionally chaotic.
Yes.
But if
Yeah.
it's a chaotic meeting and you represent that in the visual, and then you're
Yes.
blamed for not having a structured outcome.
I think that um, if I am just the illustrator in the room, then and not facilitating and illustrating at the same time, they it wouldn't matter if I become the scapegoat. I don't care. I mean, I've been in so many change meetings where I became the scapegoat and they threw spit wads at me, and like that. Because I was there after they had done a reorganization. People had gotten fired, and I was working with the people coming back. That was my first career. I was a change agent armed with a curriculum about change, And that's when I began to draw in the room, because I realized if I didn't help them to see alignment in how awful it was, then they would never let go of the past and move to the future. That was the
Mm.
first learning I had about visuals. If I can see that you are mad too, and we feel frustrated and disenfranchised and all these things, that gives a sense of internal just resonance. And that resonance is a place to hold and hold firm. I just would let people sit in that for long enough that they were ready to shift to the future. And I wouldn't try to force them. And so it's the same with a visual. If I'm facilitating a room, like sometimes at the 3 bold steps part, we've done the current, we've done the future, now we got to get to the action steps. There is always a lot of dissonance right in here, almost always, because this is vernacular. People are trying to wordsmith it instead of get the essence. And not everybody is strategic. So you have to up level their thinking. Okay, will this couple under that if we use this under that? And if I force that, I inevitably will have to change the illustration after I've left the meeting. They'll send me a note and it will say, you know, we found a better one for the first bold step and wonder if you can change it. And I'm like, of
Mm.
course, anything can be changed in Photoshop, right? And reprint the map and all of that. But that is a facilitator misstep to force the process. You might want it to come to closure in a beautiful way and tie it with a bow, but that's not really your role. Your role is to um, create a space for dialogue so that they can move forward better. And that, is a tricky place.
Yeah, it's like a midwife. It's their baby.
Exactly.
You're just helping, and if you replace the baby, they won't take care of it. Such bad.
But it's so true. It is really true. I mean, have you had sessions that went like that?
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I think in the begin, I think it's a classic beginner mistake
Yeah.
where you can. I thought that I could see all the beauty and I could just help them translate and interpret
And they
and
end
put
up
it
being
together.
really mad at you. They end up being really mad at you at the
And
end,
at the
which,
beginning, they loved it. They were in the
of
session, they were
course,
really grateful. And
yeah.
then
And
they,
afterwards,
the Monday after, they were like, oh, what did we discuss and what did it mean? And then they realized that actually, yes, it sounded nice, but it wasn't their own.
yeah, yeah, not helpful. And I think now too, um, when I'm facilitating something now and I know it's going to potentially be contentious, I, I get as much information as I can, but I know that when they try to create an aggressive agenda, I just say, what's going to happen in the room is going to happen in the room, and we're going to get as far as we can. Are you okay with that?
Mm,
Because otherwise, you're setting yourself up to try to force them through a conversation that is really vital. And if your collaborator on their end is not skilled, then that makes it interesting too,
yeah,
because you really have to educate them and help them to understand better why.
yeah. And what I also hear is, if I understand you correctly, you facilitate and illustrate at the same time.
Correct.
So this means by definition, the entire process slows down,
Well, I'm a fast illustrator, as you
as
know.
I
So
saw.
I give them, of course, some things are slower, but it doesn't grind to a halt. I often have them write things on post-its, put them up there, and then I put them on the next task
Mm,
while I illustrate that section if I feel like it's important to keep it going
yeah.
quickly. Um, and I also, I will hire illustrators too. Sometimes if I think, oh, this meeting, they need a beautiful image. They
Mm.
don't need a rough sketch that I'm going to do. And they don't have the budget for me to go back in the studio and work on it again. So I'm going to bring an illustrator with me, and that will help. And that's all they do is just illustrate.
And funny enough, I saw it as actually a gift to slow down the process because I have the impression that sometimes we're rushing too much from one thing to the next. Although if we would just slow it down to really look at the to look at what we've discussed, at the
Yes.
metaphors,
Yeah.
as it
Yeah.
emerges.
Except if you're at Amazon, they're not going to let you do that. They won't let you slow down. You have to, I mean, they're packed agenda. But if you're doing something with an employee resource group and there's multiple voices in the room from different resource groups, POC and, LGBTQ plus and, all of the different women and, diversity of abilities, then that is a conversation that needs to go slowly.
Mm, yeah,
Then I would make sure that I have them watch me draw and ask, is this right? Is
yeah.
this the right drawing? Right. Do you work with an illustrator often?
No, unfortunately not. And I must say, I most of my work nowadays is, I would say 99% is training more than
Ah, yes.
facilitation. Yeah.
Yes. Is it facilitation training or different kinds of training specific to your?
It is it's not specifically facilitation training, also a little bit of yeah, also facilitation training, but mostly communication, psychological
Yeah.
safety, feedback.
Good. All the things that everyone needs.
Yeah, and then I see the training we do a little bit as a Trojan horse. So we come in, we have the label corporate training, but what we
Uh-huh.
actually do is we create collaborative cultures
Yeah.
because I apply facilitation skills so
Yeah.
that people actually experience what it means to be in conversation with each other and to connect with each other
Yeah.
before connecting to the content. And
Oh, that's nice.
that's where
That's
the
good.
beauty is.
Yeah, that's the appreciative
Yeah.
inquiry model, right? Where everybody gets to know each other first in their story. So they have that ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And I must say every time that I see the work of an illustrator, and especially during the workshops at the festival, I was reminded of the benefits because we don't take, I think we are so busy with everything that if we're presented with something that looks like a document that we have to read,
Not going to
we,
happen.
exactly, it's not going to happen. So we have to catch the curiosity, we have to catch the imagination. So, and also, I think images help others to make it their own because automatically our brain starts to interpret, to look, to explore.
Yes. And I think what I love about getting into conversation about things that matter in a room is that you can then help educate people a little bit about what is the imagination
Mm,
really, and how can you use it as a portal for understanding the world at a deeper level? How can you use it to project into a future that you want and then create a strong connection to it so that you accelerate the process of helping yourself make change? How can you, create a session or even a meeting where uh, you are simply having people draw so that they begin to understand self and what a visual actually does.
mm,
And my favorite thing to do is to show people how to um, do graphic recording or to draw, because here, I didn't know how to draw. So I love showing a team that needs to be able to draw, in a facilitation of 600 people, and then they have 12 people, and they all want to be able to draw whatever people are saying. But I'll go in and do a training for them so that they understand it's not that hard. You actually already see the picture up here. The goal is to get out of the way and just draw what you see in your
What do you
imagination.
mean by that?
Well, most of the time, people think my drawing skills suck.
Hmm.
98% of the people that I see or interact with, they say that, oh, I can't, how many of you in the room think your drawing skills suck? Well, everybody will raise their hand because everybody thinks that to draw means you have to draw like an artist.
Mm.
But no, we sketch things all the time. We doodle when we're talking to people on the phone. We sometimes, if we've seen any sketch noting thing, we might draw a little picture of something. Or if we were educated later, like after in the from 2015 on, then we knew that drawing our school notes made a difference, right? So I think that this showing people that anyone can draw is
Mm.
essential. It
Yeah.
changes you.
Unfortunately, I was educated before. I'm still one of
Right.
those
Me too. I was
traumatized.
still in trouble
Yeah.
drawing in the margins. I got in so much trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you speak so much about change. Is this the majority of the work you would do now is to drive change processes or
I
to help
think,
people change?
yeah, help people envision a future. And in order to get into that future, it requires a behavior change. It requires understanding the big picture and how your role plays into it. But on personal, I think I have changed careers, 4 times, right? Major career shifts. I've lived in so many different cities now that I feel like I am in a constant state of change, and I like the discomfort of change.
Mm.
It makes me it makes me know myself at a deeper level. Ooh, I'm not an actor anymore. Who am I? Oh, I'm going to be a gardener. I mean, I spent weeks weeping in that garden because I didn't know who I was, right? But that was a pivotal moment where I turned to my inner resources and learned to develop a relationship between myself and my higher self, my more spiritual self, so that I would know that I was loved in the
Mm.
universe and that I didn't have to have all the answers. I could ask and things would happen.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this humility is what we need then in order to excel in our profession, right? We don't need to have all the answers. Change is inevitable and very,
Yeah.
if we're lucky, it's us who decides that we want to change. Usually it's others who decide on our changes.
Well, I think we initiate that internally, inside. If you don't like where you're working and you kind of stuff that down, trust me, the universe gets the message no matter what. That's how your reticular activating system works. It's always trying to solve the problem. You are giving it a problem with your dissonance. And so we think that's, out of the blue, but in fact, somewhere we're responsible for each piece of what happens.
And is it therefore that you believe in this drawing the future you envision? Because then it becomes a manifestation and something that
I
you can aspire and even unconsciously
I
see.
think that's a part of it. I think that the other part is by putting it on paper, you get it out of here and out there. There, it becomes a plan. As soon as it's out on paper, and I think whether you use the magazine articles or whatever it is that you want, pictures from wherever, but there's something about drawing the picture yourself you have a somatic connection to this vision of something you long for. And if you take the time to just let the images come and draw them, amazing things happen. I think of that woman, Marcy Willard, who drew a trophy on it, and that trophy came to be and showed up in her mailbox. She got the best entrepreneur. And then this other woman that is a friend of mine that I showed them how to envision, they ended up in Jeddah, working in Jeddah. She always wanted to go there. She just won a huge award as an entrepreneur in health now and totally pivoted her career by just drawing a picture of the future she wanted and letting it unfold and taking small actions.
And what I hear is the process of really imagining it and then putting it on paper. This means there is already a strategic work in that, where
Yeah.
if you have a very clear picture of where you want to be, it's not just a dream and then you sit there and waiting. No, you have to do the work in order to be specific enough.
Yes, and I think sometimes people will put things on that right side in the future and they don't happen. And then they wonder why. Why doesn't it happen? Well, if you assume that we're an energy field, right? And that this thing that we've drawn, it's an energy field too, because that's how atoms work in the universe, right? So we've created this, visual of what it is we want, but we are holding on to things in the past, or we haven't grown enough. Like I wanted to be a keynote speaker, gosh, in my mid 30s. But it wasn't until I was 45 that I actually started to get work as a keynote speaker.
Mm.
Why? I asked myself, well, why did that happen? And I thought, well, because you needed to practice and you needed to believe that that you were worth it, that you were worthy. And I think there's a piece of that too. We have to come into alignment behaviorally with this thing that we want. That's where the real work is, I
Yeah. And
think.
to actually have something to share on that stage that
Yeah,
is worth for others to listen to and to learn from.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And don't you find that in your work that the places that you want to grow, they take there, it's a hard, I mean, what's your experience of like you want to pivot and then what? Like,
Yeah.
uh,
I have the impression that the master always appears when the student is ready.
exactly, right?
I had a few, well, I had two major pivots in my life. One was out of academia into more higher education strategy. First coordination, then strategy, and then I left university altogether and moved and redesigned my life. That's how I came to facilitation.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic happened. Um, and yeah, usually it's I feel a little unrest, and then I find myself self-sabotaging, wondering how did that happen, and looking back, maybe that was self-induced.
Yeah. Rear view mirror too, then you go,
Yeah.
wow, if I only I had X, Y, or Z, right? And I think this is interesting too, because you came from academia, which um, is so very structured and linear in many ways, and then went into facilitation. It's a great way, but you're very improvisational in what you do. I'm sure you're structured behind the scenes, but it feels like you're allow yourself to be on the edge.
Mm. And I think that's what I need to be creative as much as the structure. And I'm coming from a field in economics, which is behavioral experimental economics. So
Yeah.
I went to mostly to Africa to run behavioral experiments. That sounds so bad. Economic experiments.
They were behavioral experiments.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so, which is very creative and has to be emergent and very human centered, obviously. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think it would make you a very good facilitator for understanding the other, because you understand how to observe and listen, and then can help them shift into a new arena.
Exactly. And in order to design these experiments to measure human behavior,
Yeah.
I had to understand the context and the dynamics and make predictions. And that's everything that I need nowadays to design a workshop.
Yes. Yeah. How often are your predictions accurate?
Very often, I must say.
I would imagine that having that kind of a degree and doing that kind of work would be so advantageous to predicting really what the outcome might be, and then allowing some variance in there so that you could adjust.
Yeah, exactly. And I cannot predict the outcomes. I cannot predict what they will come up with, but I can predict some of the dynamics, group dynamics, and how individuals would react and how they can get in their own way so that I can create a process that makes it easier for them.
Yes.
So I think that's the main manipulative move that I would
And
apply.
that's right. And that's the same thing with people drawing. When they need to get out of their own way, that
Mm,
means they got to get the critic out of there, which is worried about what other people are thinking or how they'll be judged by using a picture. In fact, people are much more engaged when you draw even a bad picture. I mean, look at Dan Rome is not an artist. I mean, he can draw, but he is not who wrote on the back of the napkin. He
mm,
he
yeah.
he shows people stick figure drawing to communicate a concept, and I've used a couple of his processes, particularly when I'm trying to get a group to come to alignment and understanding about marketing messages. He has some really great things
Mm,
to offer, and I'm always looking for those.
yeah. And I think we get so stuck on words because we believe that we mean the same thing and then we don't, or we get very peculiar about which words to use, and then at the end we find out that we mean different things by using the words anyway, so it was totally useless.
Oh my gosh, we so get in our way all the time
Yeah.
by making all these assumptions about other people, what something means, and interpreting it. This is why, I think with email, it's so tricky
Mm,
because you want to make sure that the communication is clear.
yes.
That's the
Yes.
one place that I end up, hashtag fail. I'll send an email and then I'll be like, oh my God, I didn't read through their whole email. They asked 3 or 4 questions down there at the bottom. I just wanted to get it done, like that.
And
So
for these kind of things, ChatGPT is really good.
exactly.
Not to write the answer because you don't want to know what you're answering, but to double check
Yeah.
and whether it's actually clear. How often has ChatGPT told me if I ask, please double check what is missing? I'm like, what's the call to action? Don't you want to be more specific? You would be more effective if you put a deadline in here. Like, "Oh, thank you."
There you go. Now Chat GPT is your parent.
Yeah, let's call them assistant.
But with a rod,
Yes.
a little whip.
Oh,
Oh, that's
yeah.
hilarious. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Um, there was one curiosity that I parked, and I will bring it up. You worked at the beginning of your career after you left the acting. You worked with inmates in prisons.
Yeah. Yeah, I
What have
did.
you learned from that time?
Um, well, one, I didn't feel that there was much difference between me and them. I had done things and I'd just not gotten caught. That's what I would often say to a room full of people. And that was one. The second thing was, I, when I first started to work as a drama therapist, I worked with women in was it a county jail? Maybe a county jail. And there was like 100 women in one thing, one group. So I had maybe 70 women at the same time, 60 women at the same time. And they were at these picnic tables bolted to the floor. And I had to get them engaged right away. So I would take some good contemporary music and just a snippet of the song, and I would play, guess that tune first. And if they guessed it, then we would dance to that tune. And that was how I got them engaged. But then I would do role play, and I found that they were stuck in the roles.
Mm,
And they would always play, prostitute. They'd play single mother. They'd play the police. They'd play the pimp. They'd play the, homeless. All these things, but they never played leader. They didn't play, a bunch of different things like sage. Sage in terms of a wise person. They
mhm,
didn't play a doctor. They didn't play roles outside of these, like 6 roles. So I created a card game for them to play where I would write a role on it and they would have to pull the card, and then we'd talk about what the role was and how would you play it. Then they
mm,
would have to play that role in the scene, whatever the improv scene was. And this was very useful, and it showed me that if you help expand people's role repertoire by letting them practice it, that then it would become part of them.
mm. Thank you. And I can imagine that if we take this experience and put it in, we can take it almost the same experience and put it into a corporate office
Of
where maybe
course.
the 5, 6 roles would be very different
Yeah.
and still they might be stuck in it
Yeah.
and not feeling open or creative enough to actually escape this box.
Or who they are within that box, right? So in order for you to propose ideas, it has to be a safe environment to do it. Otherwise, if they say no and nobody's listening, and they aren't including your idea up there on the board, then you're not going to want to be there, and you're not going to want to put your ideas up. And I think that's a limiter too. So yeah, I think it's a good technique anytime
Yeah.
to see what role have you placed yourself in and what do you believe that role is about. And
Mm.
as a facilitator, like, don't you think you've changed as a facilitator over time?
Oh, 100%.
And how have you changed?
I think the biggest one is, as we discussed beforehand, I think earlier I thought that I need to have the answers and I need to help them to come to the outcome because they hired me for that. So it's my responsibility.
Yes, it is.
And I came in, I mean, my backstory was a researcher, academia, right?
Right,
So,
right,
okay, so we're doing that, and now what's the outcome? What do we put on the paper?
right, right.
Um, and I think now much more confident in trusting the group. Okay, it's your time, it's your
Yeah,
process. I won't babysit you, and I won't be here on Monday morning anyway.
exactly.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that. I like that. Maybe I'll say that in the room now. I won't be here on Monday morning anyway, so make your plan work.
yeah.
Yeah, make it a plan just for you. Yeah, and I think it takes a certain kind of confidence to be able to go with the flow in the room and read the room in that way. Although you were probably highly skilled at that already as a researcher in the kind of ethnographic work you did, right?
Yes,
It's like an
and
anthropological study, right?
it
Yeah.
is. I think the difference with anthropologists is that they observe without being part of it. And we
Uh-huh.
run experiments that are highly designed.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's not natural.
Yeah.
Um, but then at the same time, um, I was not trained as a coach. And all the inner work of Are you getting triggered? Do you absorb what's going on in the room? Being opinionated, being um, knowing it better.
Yeah.
All of
Yeah.
these things, I really had to learn on the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an ongoing learning, I think, too. As you evolve, I mean, for me, as I evolved as a person, I actually spoke up more in a room
Mm,
when and it's interrupted bad behavior in a room. I called out leaders in a room. They didn't like it, didn't hire me back, but it didn't matter. I showed the people in the room that you can do that and that that was not
mm.
appropriate.
Integrity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big, big thing. Big eye with me that
And what were the
people act.
mental models you had to unlearn when you shifted careers?
I think the biggest one was that I had to unlearn that you had to be right,
Mhm.
that there was a right. That was a mental model, that there was a right way to do things. I'm still unlearning that, I think. Um, and that there are so many other ways to do things. That is just the one thing I remind myself all the time. And people in the room, I remind them. It's like I give great advice sometimes. And then in my own life, I think, hey, could you apply that to you? Because that's really important. Right. And I think that the person at the front of the room needs to educate, right?
Mm,
That is a mental model. The person at the front of the room is the facilitator. If you're giving a talk, you might be educating, but wouldn't it be great if you were actually, you were engaging them, you were, in it, igniting them.
yes. Yeah. And that's something that so I think I went into the extreme directions. So I came from academia, always at the front of the room teaching.
Yeah.
And then then when going into the other extreme, like, who am I? Everyone in the space is knowledgeable and everyone knows. And then I would give the floor totally to the audience, which I thought, yeah, everyone is as smart as I am. So let's bring it all together. And actually, it's only now,
Yeah.
I would say recently, that I acknowledge maybe there are some areas where do have a lot of knowledge, and maybe
Yes,
those showing up
definitely.
want to know about this knowledge. So I should
Yeah,
take
that's
some
why they
space.
hire you, right? They're not just hiring the neighbor.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's always a balancing act.
Yeah. I think that the most important thing as a facilitator is not get fixed in your
Mm,
thinking.
yeah,
Don't get fixed or don't get set. Don't let the agenda be set. You can do it, you can work it, but throw it out. Be prepared to throw it out when you enter the room because you want to meet what's there. And I think that is true about life. You go out in your day, and if you're not looking at all the signs that you're getting from people and the engagement with people, and not taking advantage of that, well, what's the point, right?
yeah.
You'll never learn to love better. And I think honestly, I found that I know that the session in Florida is going to go really well because I love librarians.
Mm,
I spent my childhood in a library. I love the library so much I can still smell the books that I from going in there. So I always tell them how valuable they are because and even though that's kind of now that, here in the US, it's used as like a social services because so many homeless people, it's the only place they can
mm,
go to be
mm.
inside for a day, right? If the weather's inclement outside. And you know. So
Wow.
they have a whole different experience now than they did before.
Interesting. And how this shift the entire understanding of the service and the work of those who are there.
Yeah, yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah.
What remains your facilitation challenge?
Uh, I think I still like to force an outcome sometimes.
Mm.
So I still find myself like, do I know better? And sometimes I still try to interpret the bold step. What about this? What about that? I've done hundreds of these sessions. Try this one, this one, this one. This. Like, and they're like, yeah, no, none of those work for us. So then I think that is my thing. And I always think that listening better, there's always an opportunity to listen better.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
that then I work towards that.
Yeah. And you have your listening pen, right?
Exactly. With my listening pen.
Yeah.
True.
And still, yeah, I can totally relate to this impatience then also, especially if we see the time evolving and then we want to
Yeah.
help.
Right. We so do. We
Yeah.
do. We want to help.
And then Monday morning.
Yeah.
If you could speak to your younger self and give them an advice, what would that be?
Just be yourself. Be your full, authentic self. It was hard to do that when I was growing up and being gay.
Mm.
Very difficult. But know that you're okay just the way you are.
Yeah. And then I remember what you said in the beginning where you left the acting career. If you depend too much on the opinion of others, then this is maybe the wrong career.
Yes. And I think that's always a thing for me. I struggle against that. That's one of my things from the past. And it's good for me, whenever I feel like I don't know what's happening. If I let myself be swayed by other people's opinions, which I can be, then it takes me off course.
Mm.
And I have learned time and again that I I can when you work with really great illustrators in the studio, you can default to asking them, what do you think this should look like? In fact, you always know what you need it to look like. And so I've gotten really good at, holding firm to my vision, being collaborative. But if I know the client and I just have an illustrator helping, I have to communicate very clearly, this is what I want, and not settle for anything but that.
Mm. What a leadership skill. And you have to be so explicit in that.
Yeah.
I haven't even thought of the case where you would collaboratively collaboratively work on an illustration for one client with different artists.
Yes. Yeah. Especially if you have a really great artist, they're going to want to bring their interpretation. And one of the artists that I work with, in his own painting, he never showed people smiling. And I was like, no, all these people need to be smiling. They are smiling going up that mountain because that's what we want them to feel. And so the image is a reflection of what the future could look like.
Yes, and these are the details that matter because that's
Yes.
what will be reflected back at them, what will be in the middle
Yeah.
of the conversation.
Yes. My dog is starting to cry right now. Can you stop the recording and I'll give them a biscuit and then they'll stop?
Yes, and then we're about to close anyway.
Okay, good. All right, let me grab them a biscuit. Hold
Yes,
on.
yes, yes. Poor doggy.
Crybaby Ranch. I thought so. Yeah. That's how it is.
Um, yeah. So how do you align last question, just because I'm so curious, I haven't thought of that. If you're working with a group of colleagues on several visuals for a client, so how do you make sure that you use the same metaphors, that you hear the same things?
Well, if you set the frame for it in advance. So these are some things we could hear in this session. And these are the things I think might support it. Anybody have any other ideas? Then they're engaged with it. Then I'll do a consistent check-in. So if it's multiple facilitate or illustrators, then I'll do a check-in to see how's it going and what are you drawing. Oh, that's good. Let's pull that into everybody's drawings, right? So that we get a unified picture. If and that's if it's emerging in the room. If it's an image that I have already drawn for the leader, then they're simply making a beautiful picture of what I have drawn. And that's a very different thing.
Yeah,
Then it's just you beautify it. And yes, ooh, that's fantastic. And yes, what do you think we should do about this? Put it in a cloud. Okay, great.
yeah.
Yeah,
Fascinating, all these layers.
yeah.
Thank you.
And always just inviting their opinion, I think, because and knowing that you're the owner of it, right? You own the process, and so you have to take the mantle.
What have you learned about listening in general from your work as a illustrator?
You can always listen better,
Mhm.
and that don't capture too quickly, because there may be more underneath that they're about to reveal. And if you can wait, just wait one more second, you'll get more.
Mm.
And
Mm.
ask a provoking question. If I'm the facilitator, of course, I want to dig under it. Well, what's under that? What do you think? What's the feeling that's behind that? It sounds like there's more to that, and getting to that.
And it reminds me of conversations where especially when we are in exciting conversations, so tempting to yes and just a little bit too quickly, and then we haven't listened to the more that could have come afterwards.
Yes. Yeah. The unspoken part.
Yeah. And something that sometimes just needs a second more
Yeah, a
to
little
emerge.
breath, a little air. Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of rushing through things. I think, and that was the great thing about your festival for me, was I felt like things weren't rushed. People didn't rush because they were trying new things. They just let it go as long as it took. And then when they felt like it should go on, and it was very interactive, it was very nice.
Mm.
And I
And
was happy to be a part of it.
thank you. It made a big difference.
Well,
And
then
keeps,
thank you for having me here too on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
yeah, me too. Thank you. When I heard a few things about your background and how you got into the work that you're doing, I was like, I need more time with you. So I'm glad we had this time
Me too.
to
Me
explore
too.
and emerge.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Patty.
you so much. Thank you.
And have fun with the librarians.
I will.
Yes.